Well, we're so excited today. I'm joined by two amazing people from here in our community that are leaders that are going to help us as we kick off our series one at a time to really give us perspective on what's going on here in our community. And so I have Debbie Kennedy, who is the CEO of the Wichita Children's Home, joining us. Thanks for being here, Debbie.
Thank you for the invitation.
Absolutely. And then I have Dion Gates, who some Pathway people probably seen you slumming around here sometimes, man. When I remember so many things that you've helped us with, and Dion has been a pastor, he's been a former police officer, and he's also a leadership coach here in our community. But one of the things I think today you're going to give us perspective on is what's really happening in our urban areas here in our community, but not just those, but all over our city. And so thanks for being here.
It's an honor.
Absolutely. So what I want to do is I want to just really ask you some questions. I know both of you are passionate people. So I'll ask a question and you're going to just tell us what is going on. And I think a lot of times when we think about our community, we really watch social media and the news and we think we have an idea of what's going on. But the two of you really know what's going on. And so I want to start with you, Debbie, because you are on the front lines of what is happening in many ways, in very challenging ways, in our families and in the lives of the children here in our communities. And so I want you to really enlighten us about some of the challenges that you see every single day that really a lot of times we don't see, but you see. And so what those look like, and then maybe a little perspective that you can give us on the scope of the challenges.
All right. Big question. I would like to start out that the reason why I'm allowed to be on the front lines is because the community of Wichita supports the work that the Wichita Children's Home does. So I have to brag on our community that they're wanting to be part of, hate to say the solution, but to be involved, very much like why you're asking us to come here and talk so that you can enlighten your congregation. So thank you very, very much for allowing me to come and speak. What do I see on a daily basis? I see the results of families being in crisis. I think one of the things that I would really like for people to understand is that I see children that are in need of assistance and care, and a lot of times the foster care system. But I also see families that really do love their children. They're not capable of parenting the children. So neither party is really, really bad. The child hasn't done bad things. Bad things have been done to them. Why is it being done? We have to peel that back and take a look at it. And many times it's the stress of what they're doing, and that results in abuse and neglect. And still, physical abuse is still one of the major reasons why children are being removed out of their homes. And that is really quite sad.
Absolutely. When I hear that and I think about that, it's kind of the ugliness of the dark side of just people being isolated that we don't see many times. And it's our friends, it's our neighbors, it's right next door to us. And a lot of times we don't like to look at that part because we like to pretend like it's not there many times.
It crosses all social economic, all groups of people. I will get calls at times saying, you've got my children, you have my grandchildren there, they don't belong there. Well, something's been done where there's been a decision by the police officers to bring the children in, because we do manage the children that the police decide to put in police protective custody. It is a phenomenal model of care that we have in our community that the most counties and most states don't have. I mean, those children are immediately brought to the children's home so we can start that care for them. We can start that healing process, and then our police officers can get out and do community policing, which is what their job is, instead of transporting them down to a juvenile intake assessment center or talking to them in a police station. So, yeah.
So Dion, kind of going off of that is, I know with a lot of the ministry that you've done in our city, that you've seen some of these challenges, in the parents, in the adults. And so it's like when you think about, I would say, the parents that Debbie was talking about and the challenges that our community is facing with adults, what are the things that you see?
One, I think that there's obviously there's not one thing. Obviously, the name of the series is like one at a time, right?
Yep.
So I think about just pointing out one thing that I feel like parents of marginalized, disenfranchised communities struggle with is when there's a resource drain and there's a system that maybe knowingly or unknowingly puts you at a disadvantage. For example, if you get a DUI, that you have access to then go back down to the courthouse to make sure that you make your court dates and that you do all the things that are necessary for you to get off probation or through that system. A lot of times people get involved in the system and they don't have the resource to get out of the system. And unfortunately, we don't do a good job of having conversations around access, not only to get into rooms, but how do we get out of certain rooms? That's important, right? For people that we're saying as a community, we want to be a healthy community. And I don't think you can really say that a community is healthiest until we start looking at the marginalized, the disenfranchised, and those who are the forgottens and the left behinds. When we get better, then everyone should get better. And that, especially those who need an extra help or some extra assistance when we have the flat tire or when we have the issue that was unexpected happen to us. Many of us can be insulated because of our resource, and it allows us to stay afloat a little bit longer, during storms. But there's some parts of our community that definitely, as we see the demographics change with the census, more Hispanics in our community, more Blacks. I think it's 17% Hispanic, 11% Blacks. There's about 28% of our community that we know documented-wise that are brown or other. And we just have to be conscious of the idea of what does it mean to belong if I'm not the majority, and how is it that I'm engaged with and do I have access and do I have hope that I can do more? So I'm thinking about what you're saying about families who have children who have been taken from them. Not that we're expecting people to be perfect, but how do I then get out of that system is a question for me. Like how do I get my kids back? And is that so many hurdles that it'd be impossible for me to jump through those? Just a conversation.
I'd like to piggyback off what you said of that disenfranchised, marginalized groups of people. I was one more time reminded about that. Several weeks ago, we had a food truck come out to the children's home. And, we try to do events to kind of bring some normalcy and some opportunities they otherwise wouldn't have. And one of the young men, 17 years of age, was sitting there with me and we were talking, and my substance abuse counselor comes by and he said, "Hey, Mr. Patrick, I just want to say thank you for saying hi to me every day and calling me by my name." And he just, fist pumped him like, no big deal. And so I took the conversation to further. It's like, why is that important to you? And he said, my whole life, I have been invisible. Nobody knows me. Nobody cares about me, very much like what you were just talking about. And I'm sitting there listening to him and I'm thinking, what I've been struggling with is how do we teach our youth that have had their power taken away from them to bring back their worth and let them understand they have worth. So I said, if I gave you a t-shirt with the name Worthy on it, what would that? And he said, I would never take it off. Why? And he starts to describe what worthy means to him. Then that opened up a whole conversation with these young people, and they all had their own reasons, but it came down to nobody sees me. I'm invisible. So and people don't call me by my name. And that's no matter where we walk in our community. We work with the homeless people, and it breaks my heart when I see people cross the street so they don't have to engage with a homeless person. Instead of saying hello, if you say hello to a homeless person or a person unsheltered, they're shocked. You've commented to them. These are simple things that we can be doing in our community to bring worth to all people. But that young man just saying, thank you. I haven't stopped thinking about that. And I think we're all challenged to learn that lesson, what he just gave me.
What you just said, it really is the heart of what we're trying to grow in as a church, is to say that one of the things that we can bring to the table is relationship. And when you tell that story of that young man, it's like he just wants to be seen and see people. And so I think for us, a lot of times, especially if maybe our families are okay and we have intact relationships, we can be a little blinded to, well, it's not that bad out there. With the people that you're interacting with all the time, and you think about our community as a whole, and you even think about racial divide, socioeconomic divide, what do you think the state of relationships and how people, because that's kind of what that young man was saying, it's like, nobody sees me. So what relational damage and division do you see, and what problems is it causing in our community?
I have to say right now, all I have to do is just look out my window or just go down to the portico. Right now, we are busy with new admissions to the children's home. The reason for that is school started back up. We have lenses on children, people seeing them and going a little disheveled, little marks on the thing, where they've gone through the summer, nobody recognizing that they're in need of help. And so we all have to say and be cognizant of our neighbors. Who are the children in our community? Who are the people that feel like, that express by their behavior that they're in need? Because it's up to us to understand other people's behavior, because sometimes they don't have the words or even know how to communicate their need. But for right now, our doors are busy being opened and caring for children, because thank God we have teachers and police officers and people in our community that are aware of some of the things and make the phone call, feel empowered to make the phone call.
Yeah, and I even think what you said earlier is it goes across all socioeconomic, all racial, whatever divide. It's like, this is a community problem that we all have.
And therefore, it needs to be a community solution.
Absolutely.
Therefore, this is why you're doing what you're doing.
Exactly. That's exactly right. So Dion, what would you say? And you have a very unique perspective, I think, especially in some of the ministries you've been a part of. When you think about it's relational poverty.
Yeah. I think for me, a component of belonging is to be seen, right? And for us to be able to say that we are Wichitans, or we belong to the community of faith, or just to anything, a family, that you've got to be seen, and you can't solve what you can't see. And so there's so many times that we're thinking about family, we're thinking about minorities, or we're thinking about people who don't have proper access to health care, or they're living in food deserts, trying to figure out how I might participate in all that my community has for me, but I'm isolated through highways or through other structures, however it might be set up. We've got to figure out how it is that we see people. And I'll tell you the truth. There's one thing to say that you want to be aware, but then there's another thing to actually see the underbelly, right? And so my prayer is that in the one at a time, it's also a measure of taking care of self, because I can't see it all, because seeing it all might be too much. It'd be too much of a burden for me to be able to have hope for after the fact. So the one at a time is also, to me, a nice meeting of, so that it's not take care of everything or see everything or go after everything, but I see a problem, and then I can then start to decide on how I might best engage it based on my purpose and how God has made me. I think for me, I see people who are saying, like, I'm not only seen, I'm unseen, but are people, do they really want to see me? Because I know that there's some communities that I never go to. There's some people groups I never interact with. And then sometimes we might interact more than others with certain people groups, and they could give us a jaded perspective on how things are. So this idea of balancing it out and saying that because I deal with, and from my law enforcement perspective, my brothers and sisters in law enforcement, because I deal with certain people groups all the time, I could imagine that that's the way that everybody in that people group is, or that everyone who looks like that behaves this way. And that could be discouraging as well. So just reorienting ourselves to what it means to be able to see people, and also to go where they're at. I think starting where people are is so important, because oftentimes it's like, well, if they would just think like me, then I might be able to do one at a time. If they would look like me, if they would behave like me, if we thought the same things were funny, or the same things were entertainment, or whatever, leisure. It's important for us to be able to say that I'm going to disrobe myself of, like our Savior did for me, for us. I'm going to disrobe myself of some things so that I can go where they are. And that might be a zip code that you're familiar with, a place that you're used to hanging out, to disrobe yourself of some things so that you might be able to go where somebody else is and deal with the discomfort there. Because I feel like God's called us to a place of discomfort right now. This is one at a time, right? This is an opportunity for us to feel how God is shaping us and how he's molding us through discomfort. And adults learn best when we're uncomfortable. And so when we're praying for comfort, I'd ask you to reconsider what you're praying for, because if we're going to do what God wants us to do, we have to embrace the discomfort. And sometimes the discomfort might be me being able to hold space for you, or me being able to hold space for you, even though you don't look like me and I don't necessarily know your background or have an access to figure out what your life experiences might have been. We don't coincide that way, but I have to be able to trust that. Because believe me, there's people in this church and other places, especially in the community of faith. I mean, I pastored for 12 years, and there's people who still don't see you even as a part of the body of Christ. Well, they're not like us. You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, they believe differently than us. Or is it that we have different preferences or whatever it is? But we've got to be able to do that thing that's different, and not just one time. And Pastor Rodney, you know this. We've got to do it more than once, because we have to exercise in it. And it can't be just a one-off. It is one at a time, but it means that I'm going to perpetually do it over and over again.
Right. Yeah, that's great. You know, the one thing you said that I think both of you live in the tension of in what you do in our community lives is uncomfortable. And honestly, the reason we're having this conversation is so that you can help all of us get a little uncomfortable. And so when you think about something that you would like our church family, I mean, there's people watching this. I think we want to know, we're trying to seek God to see how do we grow and become part of these solutions. How do we become like a healing force in our community? And it really is one at a time. But I think a perspective is really something a lot of times we lack, because we really just see our own lives. We don't see other people's lives. And so if there's one thing you could tell us, maybe some stats you could share, stories, challenges, make us uncomfortable. Like how many times do people ask you to make them uncomfortable? I'm asking you. Make us uncomfortable so that God can use that to really create a holy discontent in us. And so, Debbie, I know you're just anxious to make us uncomfortable, all right? So,
Well, I think what I can share with you are the amount of programming that we do at the Children's Home. And I think it gives you a clear picture. Why do we have to have this program? You know, the Children's Home is 134 years old. It's the longest running nonprofit in the city. And we've been flexible. The leadership's been powerful to flex in what is the community needing to care for young people and children. So if I go through the programming, you're going to see the lens is where we're at. We have police protective custody children that come through our doors all the time, which means that somewhere along the line, whether it's the school's called or persons are called, or domestic violence where the police have to arrive at a domestic violence home and they see the children shrinking over there. Or when you talk with the children about what did you do during that domestic violence time, they'll tell you their little protective factors. Well, there's a little hole in the fence that I crawl through and go over to the convenience store and hide, or ask the person to give me a candy bar, or I crawl underneath a bed, or I put my headphones on so I don't hear it, or I crawl up in the attic. I mean, they find ways to disconnect from the domestic violence, but what that's laying down is complex trauma. That they can continue to be triggered at all the time. So grateful that we have the Children's Home and many other nonprofits and services in our community to assist those children. Mental health is huge. Our children are developing complex traumas, anxiety, and PTSD, and all of the things that we want to say it is, but it's reacting to a situation that we as a community can help. I have a program for 16 to 18-year-olds that nobody tends to want to be in their space. No foster family and no parent. So we have to treat them as adults, teaching them the lessons that otherwise parents should be teaching. But we're teaching. We're the only ones in the state of Kansas that has residential programs for human trafficking victims, minors, girls and boys. Our youngest victim was 8 years old. Average age is 14 to 15 in human trafficking. And yet, no matter where they find that victim in the state of Kansas, they bring them to the children's home. So obviously there's a need to address human trafficking, whether it's sex or labor traffic. We have the only place in the state of Kansas for minors that are in state's custody that are pregnant and parenting. The average age of that young lady is 14. They're choosing to raise their, to birth their child and to raise it without any skill sets. They haven't been parented. So we're having to teach them how to be a parent at such a young age, and their bodies aren't prepared to be pregnant and carrying a child. So we have that. We have a homeless initiative. We have a street outreach team that goes out every day and looks for young people 18 to 24. And we have a drop-in center for those. And now for the last year, we've opened up a 15-bed homeless shelter for 18 to 24 that is busy, that is full. And thank God we opened it before the COVID, during that COVID period, and we kept it open. We have Kids Cope, which is for grieving families, free grief counseling for children and their caregivers. And I have to say, that's been a valuable lesson for me because suicide is up 50% from what it was last year. And our young people are dying by suicide and they're witnessing homicide. Again, complex trauma. How do we heal that? We heal it. Let's go back to our very first conversation. We heal it through connection. And I always believe that it's connection before correction. Connection before you say, I have a solution. Have that relationship with that person. Go, I understand. I know, or, the most powerful question you can ask somebody is, what happened to you? What happened to you? And then sit and be an active listener. Don't try to figure out the solution while they're telling you the problem. Get engaged with that problem and connect, really connect, exactly what you were just saying, across all sectors of our community. That's pretty powerful, and that's empowering.
It is amazing, number one, the work you're doing,
Right.
but it is heartbreaking, and it should affect all of us and make us uncomfortable that work has to be done.
And so it means that I don't have to tell you the stories. You can just say, wow, that's programming that's being maintained. There's some problems there. But, there's a young man that stopped me yesterday, and he's been in and out of the children's home for 10 years. And he started counting all the things. A child shouldn't be in and out, but thank God. He was like, I kind of grew up here. Not that he stayed the entire 10 years, but he kept coming back to us. And had a moment in the parking lot. Sometimes those moments in the parking lot are powerful.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, that definitely is something that propels you to continue.
And again, it's developing trusting relationships with people. I wouldn't be here if I didn't trust you. You wouldn't be here. The conversation you and I had before we went on camera, amazing. Yeah,
that's great. All right, Dion, now it's your turn, man. Make us a little uncomfortable. I'm uncomfortable.
Let me just say this, that I think suicide for me, you hit on this, and I just want to just jump back in there. There's so much that comes across the police radio that never gets mentioned on the evening news. And that goes from sexual assaults, rapes, robberies, home invasions, that even includes suicides, that there's a lot of things, the DUIs, the accident, there's a lot of things that don't get put on the news that show up at our hospitals, that show up in the courtrooms. And we are just sometimes so insulated that it becomes frightening to maybe think that people that they just don't care, or is it that they just aren't aware? But my big one right now is the suicides, because I think that there's a level of fatigue, as you were saying about the increase of 50%, that one of the things that we have to get comfortable with, in my opinion, one at a time, we got to get uncomfortable but be comfortable with the discomfort, is the fact that there are people who are contemplating and or attempting suicide far greater than we might know or want to realize. Some of that personally, we might know it, but some of us who don't have direct experience with it, we might be completely unaware of the type of pressure that our culture is basically putting on our young people and those who are or even older. And we have to do a better job of creating safety around what sometimes people might perceive as a weakness, and be able to say, hey, are you thinking about committing suicide? Not just saying like, are you having okay thoughts, or you know what I mean, but let's just face it directly and say like, have you had suicidal ideations? Have you tried to do self-harm? When was the last time that you attempted suicide? We've got to start having conversations around that, because it's people being taken from us way too soon, far too soon, at their own hands. And it's a lot of it's because we haven't made safe spaces for people. Well, I don't want to problem solve it. I'm just simply saying that there is something that we should be doing as far as facing suicide and why our suicide rates are so high. And I think that's also one of the things that we need to have a conversation around one at a time. What is it that we're doing in the homeland, the heartland, that still we have the same percentages of people who live on the coast? There's something going on, right? Like we have to be honest with ourselves about what we are not getting right. But then I'll also say this, the sexual abuse that's pervasive in any community, and you kind of hit on this, that we have to have discomfort around the idea that regardless of economics or education, that sexual abuse happens in all homes, not all homes, but in a majority of homes, regardless of economic background. So what's going on there? And because I'm talking about the things that are secret until they're not secret. They're the things that we don't really want to even have the conversation around, the possibility that this might be happening, until you're in our courtrooms and you see that it's completely outside of what we would normally say that's a certain zip code, or it's a certain people group, it's a certain education, or a certain economics, and we say that's none of that. You throw all that away, it's happening. And what are we going to do? How are we going to look at that and get uncomfortable with the things that are happening, even in our local churches, in our pews, in our sanctuaries? And how we face those things, I think, determine a lot about what we believe about the gospel, and really, are we really ready to do the next thing? I heard a story once, and I'm going to get this wrong, but Pastor Todd can fix this for me. I'm pretty sure he can. There's a guy who gets to heaven, and they do like a kind of a check, a screen. You might have heard this one, where they pat him down, make sure he's got no paraphernalia. You're not getting to heaven with any of that stuff that you came from the earth with. And they started patting him down, and one of the angels noticed how smooth his skin is, and they were like, "Man, you got this amazing skin. Like, how'd you keep your skin so well put together?" And he's like, "Oh, and he starts talking a little bit, and they chuckle and laugh. And then the angel gets serious. He looks at him. He said, "Was there never anything worth fighting for? That you never got dinged, you never got a bruise, you never got a nick? Like there was something. How can you make it through this life with all of its traps and its foils, and not have something that you can say, here's our biggest challenge?" And so those two things are standing out to me personally right now. Sexual abuse, obviously up during COVID, abuse in general, but then also suicides. And I'm going to say this specifically in communities of law enforcement. So I want to really point it directly at a community. So we've got the high domestic violence rates in law enforcement, high abuse rates of substance, adrenaline junkie type behaviors to mask pain, and we have high suicide rates. And so that's something that we've got to have a conversation about and look directly at. How can we deal with this?
Yeah.
So I'd like to talk also a little bit about what's going on with death by suicide. For those individuals that are contemplating that, and they actually perform the act that they carry out, they planned out, in that moment of time, that was their only solution. And they found peace in that moment. I will remove myself from whatever's happening, and I will find peace by death by suicide. We all need to go, wait a minute, where are the resources for our mental health for that? We need more mental health professionals. We need to support the mental health going on in our community. We need to bring mental health into every avenue that we're talking about. We have such complex trauma with so many different groups of people. And at Kids Cope, the free group counseling that we have for children, one of the exercises that we do with the youth is that we give them a mask, and it's a blank mask. It's one of those fiber masks. We asked for you to paint on the outside how you represent yourself to the world, and then paint on the inside what you're feeling. The non-congruent. This is how I have to present. I'm okay. I'm going to go to school and I'm going to be okay. I'm going to go to work as a police officer. I'm going to be okay. Because nobody has made that connection to go, I am hurting. And the words they use, it cuts you to the core of what's inside that mask. And so when we start recognizing that people are wearing masks because we're not asking the questions and we're not observing our neighbors, our friends, the people that we go to church with, all of those things. I mean, we have to, again, that connection, and the research shares with us that it only takes 1 to 4 trusting adults that will feed into a child, that will change their trajectory of their lives.
Wow.
It doesn't take much.
Wow.
It just means I'm going to walk with you. Show me your path, and I'm going to walk alongside you. And I might just give you something. I mean, I have a young man that I started mentoring at 14. He's 24. We went through some hard times together, but he is great. And for my Christmas present, I love this. For my Christmas present, he gave me a picture of him and I together. It was in a broken frame. And he goes to me, "I'm sorry, that's all I had." And I'm thinking, no. It's the perfect symbol of where we were and the smiling faces inside the frame. So again, I think if we can say there's lots of things going on in our community, but there's a lot of people out there like yourselves and your congregation that are willing to help. But I think it starts with connection.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I want to thank both of you for this conversation and for the perspective. And one of the things I think I'll take away from both of you as we even go into this series and try to challenge people that it's one at a time is seeing people. Man, and I hope we can all, that's my prayer, is that we can grow into that. And I want to thank both of you for seeing people and helping us see people. And so thank you for being here.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.